The last section in this chapter is entitled Understanding Instant Messaging's Features. And actually, this is kind of a collection of what I consider kind of random information. Instant messaging is usually a wireless type of communication. One of the things that they talk about in this section is that you can pretty much do a denial of service attack on a given recipient just by flooding them with instant messages. There is a short section here on controlling privacy. And this is something that is really an issue of education for anyone who uses instant messaging. Most people think that their messages are private. They're not. Nothing's private anymore. Any good network administrator is going to be probably capturing instant messaging traffic or at least logging it if that's something that the business owner wants to have happen. So even though it has nothing to do with work and you're just talking to your spouse or your boyfriend or whatever, it's not personal. If you're doing it on company time and using company equipment, it's pretty much fair game for your employer to examine whatever it is you're doing there. There is a brief section on 8.3 file naming. One of the things that they point out is that in XP and higher, obviously, probably lower too, not all file extensions are shown. If you go into your folder options and go to view, there's a checkbox that says hide well-known file extensions. What this means is that what you see when you go look at a file listing may not actually be the file extension. And they give an example of you might have a picture that shows up as a JPEG, but it could actually have an EXE at the end of it that means it's an executable. So that would be a security vulnerability. There's a table of extensions, common executable types. Most email systems are going to filter out anything that has an extension of BAT, COM, EXE, or JavaScript, or even a Visual Basic script. So if you really want to send somebody an executable program, like maybe tech support wants you to run some sort of a batch utility, they'll have to rename it, you receive it, and then you change the file extension so that it's executable, because you can't leave it that way and get it through the email system. There is a brief section here that's kind of interesting about signal analysis, intelligence, and protocol analyzers. The two things that they discuss here are footprinting, which is using different methods to try and get information about what is behind your firewall. What people are trying to do is get an idea of how your network is constructed. How many servers do you have? How many DNS servers do you have? Depending on how you've configured your network, how you've configured your DNS, some of that can actually be available to people who know what they're looking for. I know in the server class we've talked about the fact that with DNS, what you generally want to do is have a hierarchy of internal DNS servers so that only one is connected to the outside. That limits your exposure and hides the rest of your network. If you have 15 DNS servers and they all connect to the outside, then those are 15 different routes that people could use to get in and do cache poisoning. It also lets them know that you've got 15 DNS servers, which can give them an idea of how large your organization is or how spread out it is. So footprinting is one method that people can use to get information. What you can do as a deterrent is go to another server, don't use your own for this, and then do requests back and forth to see what can you find out about your network. What information do you get when you try and do a zone transfer? You should get nothing, but you might get something, which would indicate that you've got a hole in your DNS configuration. Scanning is another thing that you can do. You can do trace routes, either from inside or from outside, to see what different devices you go through. At some point, most routers are going to stop giving information, and your router should not give out information too. But if you don't have it configured properly, it can tell you, gee, I'm going to go from Joe's server to Sue's server to a different server, and that gives an idea of what your internal network looks like. You can also do port scanning, and you'll see this all the time on your firewall logs that it dropped a possible port scan attempt. There's all sorts of free software that you can run against a given IP address, and you can just check to see, is there any activity on that port? Is it open? You can even just do a regular telnet session to an IP address and a port and see if either that port's open or closed. Based on well-known port numbers and the fact that you can tell whether something's open or closed, that can give you an idea of what some exploits are that you could use to either get into that environment or that you can exploit to give you a back door. So I think that in terms of the information in this chapter, make sure that you focus on that handout that I have. You're going to be asked about those different protocols. You're going to be asked about which is the routing one, which is the transport one, and then you're also going to be asked about the wireless protocols and all the different details about that. And that's the end of this audio lecture.